In today's video, we aren't necessarily exploring a kink, but an identity that is more prevalent in the fandom than some would honestly expect. At birth, we were all assigned some sort of gendered identification, from ticking the box of male or female to possibly having gendered things shoved in our face when we were children. Gender plays a really big role in many of our lives. But what if what was written down didn't really match the gender you identified with? What if there wasn't really a box for you to tick? Well, today we're going to look at our non-cisgendered friends and some of the experiences that they have in the community, both at conventions and in some cases online. Like I said, this isn't a kink. But in looking over how some of the experiences varied from person to person, some may tread on 18 plus territory, so to be safe, it has been added to Furries After Dark, and I hope you guys are cool with that. In my past videos, I've largely glazed over the more sexual side of the fandom, and while that might put some parents at ease, I realize I've left out a pretty big part of this fandom that is largely misunderstood. Many furries that engage in the more lewd interests that exist in the fandom often have to hide those interests because of the perceived stigma of being associated with them. To combat this, I've decided to begin a series on these more after dark topics in collaboration with real furries that have these interests. Because after all,
You and me, baby, ain't nothing but mammals, so let's do it like they do on the Discovery Channel. Do it again now.
so let's figure out how some do it on this channel. So what do I mean when I say non-cisgendered furries? That's a mouthful, ain't it? The easiest way to explain this would be to say that some don't necessarily agree with the box ticked at birth. But we don't do easy here. Non-cisgendered typically encompasses those who are transgendered, non-binary, gender fluid, or may fall somewhere in the middle of that spectrum. Of the 21 that responded to the Google Forms survey, the two largest groups who responded were non-binary persons at 38% and trans males at 19%. We also asked those who were non-cisgendered if their persona matched the gender they identified with, and about 90% said that they did. We also asked some of our respondents to share their experiences in the fandom. Here are some of those.
The furry fandom was honestly a fresh start for me, as I knew no one, and thus no one had any preconceived notions about my gender. I was able to freely identify myself without the fear that someone I knew would be able to call me out. I had previously explored my identity internally and taken the first steps to externally expressing my ideal self, but simply asking someone I knew to refer to me, as he was beyond my strength to endure. The first furry meet I went to was small but mostly made up of other trans or non-binary people. The other meets I attended after that had a higher ratio of cisgendered people, but the vast majority of them were understanding and aware of trans-identifying people. Since that first meet, I can recall only a few instances in the furry fandom where my identity was questioned. For instance, there is one individual who consistently misgenders me for what I assume the simple reason is that they remember I am trans, but they are unwilling to make the effort to remember which way, FTM or MTF. I harshly distance myself from individuals who do this because it is not my responsibility to teach them easily accessible information. My pronouns are available on my social media. It also shows the lack of respect one has for another to not even do someone the tiny service of remembering their identity is extremely telling. Regardless of irritating situations such as this, I have never felt unsafe because of my gender, and for that I am thankful. It has helped me explore who I am, experimenting with pronouns, names, etc. So far pretty accepting. However, I do get a lot of warnings that there will be a lot of hate and slander thrown my way. I have only really came out about my identity to my spouse and some members in the fandom. I have had positive from the non-cis people, but at times I have had problems with cisgendered people, especially those that are gay and match my biological sex. Wonderful. People are extremely supportive and accepting. When I'm in furry spaces, I feel totally comfortable dressing however I want. It's been very welcoming and accepting. The fandom was the first true place I could come out without fear of repercussions.
Another question we introduced for this video was whether furries thought that non-cis furries had a different experience from cisgendered furries at cons. Interestingly, 71% said yes, they did. So, what would make an experience at a con different for someone who isn't cisgendered? Well, we asked for more clarification, and many responded with 3 core issues that carried over from response to response. Gendered language is everywhere at cons, from rough guesses at gender to incorrect assumptions due to a suit's body shape. People are misgendering people left or right from making assumptions about suits or outward expression, and it happens a lot. Bathrooms often present very disorienting situations where passing or non-passing can lead to equally uncomfortable situations and confusion. Someone who may pass as one gender may have a slightly easier time. Someone who may not pass might have a terrible time. It's not exclusive either way, but it leads to a lot of very uncomfortable situations. Yet another reason that we shouldn't have genders on bathroom doors. I just think it's stupid. Video for a later date. 18 plus room parties can also cause some of these situations. Discrimination against non-cisgendered furries can be very prevalent in these situations, and it was cited several times as being especially common at room parties hosted by cisgendered males. Now, anecdotally, I've heard multiple stories of discrimination in those specific room parties. Usually, when the gender of the party, or it's a party for a specific gender, has an issue with someone who is transgender and does not have the body that they were assuming would show up to the party. Usually it happens where trans males are refused from male parties, or trans females are rejected from parties for women. Honestly, the fact that this still happens is really unfortunate. I understand, like, if you have a room party with a couple of your friends and you just want to keep it to your friends, but advertising a party as for the boys and then not letting all the boys in, that's kind of sucky, and our non-cis friends shouldn't have to deal with that. To be clear, acts like this are horrible, deplorable, and honestly, we just shouldn't have those parties in general, but you know. Here are some other experiences reported by our non-cis respondents.
I have a trans IRL friend who got me into the fandom, and she is MF, and I've noticed some people still do not see her as the tall, strong woman that she is. She is trying to pass, but it's hard when she's about 6 feet tall and rather thin. Me being gender fluid, I haven't been able to go to a con yet. I am hoping to go soon with a partial suit that fits me and has 2 different gender types. Specifically eye shape, hairstyle, and face shape. I see trans furry con goers having an experience that cannot be replicated by cisgendered people. The real-life furry fandom provides us with a wonderful opportunity to share and experience a gender euphoria through limitless and unashamed character design, gender non-conforming artists and entertainers, and a chance to forge relationships with like-minded people. Especially for fursuiters, it can be easy to misgender people under their suit and be unwilling to switch over. Bathroom issues, people being confused by appearances versus pronouns, 18+ room parties. The same issues we have outside of cons and the furry community are still present in the community. Unofficial gatherings like gender-specific room parties can be harmful for the non-cis community when lack of communication is present, and the lack of representation for all genders and sexualities can also be damaging. Going out as trans, you will feel vulnerable about every aspect of how you present, especially if you are starting to transition pre-HRT, where you always have thoughts of, am I just faking this? Is this really something I want? Or wanting to dress more of the gender you want to present as and not passing. The term passing is used a lot, and at a con, even if you are in a suit, you could not pass just cause of your voice not being one stereotypical of the gender you are presenting as. Society has not normalized not being cis to the same levels as cis identities are. Even if all trans, NB and fluid folk have a good time, it still will not be the same experience. I believe we are moving more and more closer to these things being more equal within the fandom though. I myself have never been to a con, but I have been to some small meetups only consisting of maybe 100 people. But I was talking with some local furs, and you could tell the divide in the room. The person I was talking with only had maybe 2 to 3 people that would come up to them, and I asked why that was, and they stated that it was because they openly identify as a trans female but couldn't afford the surgery or hormones. For many trans people, fursuiting is a way to experience their true gender. However, sadly they still face transphobia and misgendering if they use their voice, for example, and some people even act repulsed when they realize a fursuiter is a different sex than they thought. The spectrum of treatment stretches from being harassed and ostracized to being patronized or downright sexualized and abused solely for our trans identities. Witnessing, let alone experiencing these instances, is more often than not extremely harmful to people like myself in our community. Though this problem isn't just exclusive to the fandom and is reflective of a larger issue, it would help if the community as a whole works to provide a positive and safe space for trans individuals.
Let's bring things back a bit, shall we? So, with so much gendered language to combat, many incorrect assumptions in and out of suit, where do many non-cis furries go for support? Well, we asked several of our respondents, and a commonality shared amongst many was representation of the non-cis community through trans YouTubers like Ash Coyote. In fact, Ash's name came up a lot. I'm a huge fan of Ash myself, and if you haven't seen Ash's work, there'll be a link in the description. You should definitely go check her out. Others had great resources too, so let's hear from some of them.
Ash Coyote's the fandom and YouTubers. My GSA in college, online resources like PFLAG and the Trevor Project, following people on social media. My intro to queer theory came from people channels like ContraPoints Philosophy Tube and other breedtuber channels. Non-binary and trans telegram groups, articles, other trans and non-binary people themselves. Speaking with other BIPOC and B-furs to understand better that I'm not alone in this, and so many people have taken the time to help me both financially and personally to become a better person for others and myself. Don't laugh, but Tumblr was my beginnings of finding out I'm not the only one who sees myself as either male, female, or some weird amalgamation of the two. Twitter and YouTube were the next resources, though in the beginning, it was minimum. Now it seems to have grown and spread out, for better or worse. Mostly YouTube videos and personal experiences written by trans people on social media. Asking around a lot. Mainly Telegram. This may sound odd, but the furries that I have met that were non-cis really like to show off and are proud of their transformations they are going through. I have participated in some LGBT+ and gender-centered events. I know several trans non-binary people who lead large and small events, encourage charitable giving, and spread information and history vital to our community. Havenkan touches the trans community and the furry fandom, and Gender Unbound, while not furry, is another great event that brought many trans and non-binary artists together. Friends' experiences, the internet, books. Before, after, and during my transition, watching trans YouTubers and hearing about their experiences was significantly useful for me when I was discovering who I am. I still watch these YouTubers to this day to try to learn as much as I can since, at least in my school, LGBTQ+ education was non-existent, and this lack of information makes me feel like I am missing pieces of myself and my own history. YouTubers like Ash Coyote and Bolt Mutt were very helpful sources alongside just being part of the fandom. There is so many wonderful members of the furry community that are non-cis.
So, what are some ways that we as a fandom can help our non-cis friends? Well, I spoke with a couple friends, and here's just some ideas they had. 1. Ask for pronouns. If you aren't sure, always feel free to ask. Most people I've spoken to actually don't mind if people get confused, as long as they ask and correct themselves or make an honest effort to learn them. I get it, sometimes you goof and heck up, but another way to get around that is just refer to them by name until you have a chance to ask them. It's pretty easy. A big one is support non-cisgendered charities in your area, both in and out of the fandom. Many who identify as non-cisgendered can face discrimination, rejection from family, and in some cases have been ejected from their homes for coming out. If you can't financially support these causes, remember that a tweet or a post on social media can also make a really big difference. And probably the biggest and most obvious one is ask questions. If you're not sure how you can best support your friends, just ask. If you don't know what something means, just ask. And if you're not sure if you goop something up, just ask. Anyways, I hope this has been helpful, and until the next video, bye!